Welcome to the Hidden Podcast, where we simplify cybersecurity and all things tech for those of you who, like me, need it to be explained without all the jargon. So, if you've ever wondered why you still feel vulnerable even though you've bought all the fancy tools, you've come to the right place. I'm your host, Lynn, and my job is to take one of our resident experts and help them translate their cyber expertise into plain English. This means having practical conversations, usually built around Babble's hidden cybersecurity framework, which we break down in the show. Or sometimes we'll take a hot topic in the tech industry, like a major breach or a new legislation, and we'll explain how we help you stay ahead. Basically, this podcast exists so that you can sleep well at night, preferably not during the podcast. Joining me in the virtual studio today is Mark Odell. Thanks for joining us, Mark.
Hi, Lynn. It's great to be here today.
Nice. So before we dive in, do you mind telling our friends listening or watching out there a little bit about yourself in terms of what you do and where you live?
Yeah. Well, I am Director of Secure Cloud and AI here at Babble. So essentially, my responsibility is to define and make sure that we're delivering products to our customers that are useful to them and providing them real benefit. I'm actually based in Northern Ireland, and today is a typically dreary day, shall we say.
Well, hopefully, the weather isn't too much of a downer, but at least summer is around the corner. So you have that to look forward to. So
Yeah.
before we also just unpack the rest of this very first episode, do you mind telling us a bit about what most you like about what you do?
So I think two aspects, really. There's a customer aspect, which means I get to speak to and be involved in lots of different customers and lots of different business types. So I get to know about what they do, not just about the technology. And secondly, is the technology. I'm really from a technical background, and I like the technology, and that stuff is exciting to me.
Nice. Awesome. So, without further ado, today, for our very first episode, we're kicking things off with unpacking why cyber threats are so prevalent in the UK today and get you thinking about this. If a cyber incident hit your business tomorrow, who would actually take control? So, there's a lot to unpack there. So, let's dive right in. So, Mark, the UK has been ranked as the third most targeted country globally, which is insane. So, from your perspective, right? Why the UK and why now?
So I think from from an attacker's point of view, the UK has a lot going for it. And let's be clear that the criminal world is really a business. They are thinking about these things in a sensible way. It's not random. So the UK is very high value and a relatively easy target, or rather a wide target. We have a very connected economy. We have a very connected workforce and a consumer base. And comparatively in the world, it's a wealthy consumer and business base. Being English speaking, it should not be underestimated. Phishing attacks are easier to craft, even for non-English speakers, in English, because so much of the world can speak English. And AI is accelerating that, making it faster, cheaper, and more scalable. So as a top 10 economy, we would naturally be in those crosshairs for both the opportunistic and or structural attacks.
Yeah, those were great points to make. So, if you could summarize the current state of cybersecurity for UK SMBs in one sentence, what would it be? I know that's a bit of a lofty goal there.
That's a bit of an ask. Most SMBs think they've done enough, but they haven't.
Mm.
So to dig into that a little bit, a classic answer would be, well, we've got antivirus, or we haven't never been attacked, but it does miss the point, and the threat landscape has been changing. And so that past safety doesn't guarantee the future safety.
So, many small businesses still believe that they are quote unquote too small to matter. Why is that misconception so dangerous?
Well, I think in the physical world, that makes sense, right?
Hmm.
You're a florist on a high street and you're next to a bank and a jewelry shop.
Hmm.
It's pretty logical to say, well, burglars are unlikely to come in and break into my florist.
Right.
But that doesn't happen when you move it into the virtual world, because attackers quite often are not actually targeting anyone. They are using bots and, again, AI to attack wide swathes of the population and the businesses that are out there. And the cost of attacking is near zero. So once you've created a bot, once you've created a method, or you have found an in, repeating that 1,000 times, a million times, the costs don't really change. Unlike if you've got to go and physically break into a load of buildings. So the result is that even if you don't think you are important enough, you might just be unlucky enough to fall into that. There's another few things with SMBs where they might be specifically targeted. So quite often SMBs have left the doors open, metaphorically, because they've got less time and money for security. And they're also quite often likely to pay ransomware because the amounts tend to be smaller. So there's a higher chance that they're just like, okay, it's quote only £1,000, and they're also quite likely to keep them quiet. So they'll pay out, they'll keep it quiet. It can be done en masse. There's a little less risk for the criminals involved in that.
Right. And touching on that last point around ransomware, it's not exactly a foolproof solution, right? Because as we all know, even if you do pay that ransomware, there is still the high probability that they could still hold your data at ransom. They could, release your data back to you, but then they could be selling that data on the black markets as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that's if you go back a number of years, the early days of that, literally they would encrypt your data. You could get away with paying it. You don't encrypt your data, all would be well. Data now is so valuable that they're not
Yeah.
only encrypting it, they're stealing it and they're encrypting it. So you pay them and they will probably decrypt it, because
Yeah.
that's kind of how their business works. If they never decrypted it, no one would ever pay them.
Yeah.
But they've also taken a copy of it over here, and they're now going to sell that data on the dark web, or they're going to use it again against you. And the other thing is that once they've got an into your network, if you don't fixed that, then they quite happily come back and do it again. And they'll quite happily say, "Oh, they're an easy target. Well, let's try something else with them."
Right, because they're effectively the low-hanging fruits in that sense.
Yes.
And I'm really glad that you brought up, network in particular, because that is an upcoming episode where we just dive a little bit deeper into network and cloud security. But something else that you had said jumped out at me in terms of, a lot of the time these scales that are basically automated en masse, it's not necessarily about targeting an SMB, but there are cases where they are specifically being targeted. So in those cases, what would you say makes SMBs attractive targets? Is it because they've left those, virtual backdoors open? Is there more to the story that makes them more attractive to cyber criminals?
So thinking about the way with our hidden model that we're looking at, human risk is the biggest element of that, and that is about people being not trained fully. So bigger organisations will tend to have bigger training budgets, and they'll have the ability to make sure that people are more up to speed on what's required. And again, it comes back slightly to this. It's not going to happen to me. We're too small. We're not important. And I'll be relaxed about security. I've got lots of things going on in my life. I've got no one in the business specifically thinking about this. And endpoints is the second, but often that's just humans misusing the endpoints. That's humans clicking on things, or that's humans not applying updates, or risky behavior, taking them places, needing them unlocked on trains, that kind of thing. The other thing with SMBs is supply chain attacks, i.e., where you are the intended victim, but you are not the route in. That's through one of your suppliers. Think of someone like the Jaguar Land Rover supply chain attack that came through a smaller business. So most of those higher profile things will come through smaller businesses. So as an SMB that is providing services to a bigger company, you might actually be at risk because of that. Because you're like, oh, well, I don't care about X company, but I do care about the person that they're supplying.
Right. Okay. So now when we talk about suppliers and customers as well, that reminds me of a term that I recently came across called island hopping. So for those who might have come across that term as well, is that what you are basically describing, where they're effectively using your small business as a gateway or a bridge to gain access into the database of a much bigger business that you're connected
Yeah,
to?
exactly that. The big companies will have better security often, not always, often.
Yeah.
And therefore it's like, how can we get into there, and what are we going to do that's going to work our way through the
Hmm.
back door?
Yeah. So, I'm glad that you already touched on hidden, which we will be diving a little bit deeper into with Adam Bearder in the next episode. But I want to just stay on these silent or hidden gaps, if you will. So, we've already spoken about human risk and supply chain and endpoint, which are basically the devices that connect to the company data. So let's chat a little bit about backups, right? Because this comes up a lot in terms of how they are, a cybersecurity threat.
Hmm. So there's two ways. There is the initial, have you got a backup? Which is as old as IT, that is, and probably beyond IT. What do you do? What do you do if you lose your primary source of something? You want a secondary source of it. And there is, so there is just the simple fact of something's gone wrong. Can I get it back? That's what a backup is for. But of course, what's happening with a backup is you're taking all of your data set, and you're putting it somewhere. And that somewhere nowadays is often in the cloud. It could be actually could be a box that you physically keep. Some people still do that, or it could be with a smaller or bigger vendor where they're keeping a copy of your data. So now, if I'm thinking about how I steal data, well, hold on. There's two things I've got to worry about. I can either go to the source, which we've thought a lot about. We've really secured the source, or I can go, "Where's that backup gone?" I'll go and find the backup provider and the backup copy of that data, and I'll just take the data straight out of the backup. I don't need the live copy. I don't care if it's a day or
My
two.
goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you need to be thinking about the backup, and that's quite often outside. Is that encrypted properly? Is that secured? Have you put it somewhere reliable?
Yeah. So that brings me to the next question, which is, in your experience and your opinion, would you say that most businesses are aware of those gaps, or are they unfortunately discovering them the hard way?
No, so I think they are discovering them the hard way. I think that's fairly. Um, the backup one, as an example, is
Yeah.
is probably fairly rare, but
Okay.
it definitely does happen.
Okay.
It's more often simpler things within the SMB. There's quite often free things haven't been done because security is always this balance between usability and being secure. There's a kind of a techie type joke that's like, well, I can make your stuff secure. I'm going to put it in a lead box. I'm going to bury it 50 feet under the ground, and I'm going to make sure no one can get to it. It's secure. Your data is safe, but it's no use
Okay.
to you because you can't
Good
access it.
luck getting your
So,
work done.
yeah,
So, switching gears to how there has been this shift in risk, right? You've spoken about how AI driven threats have essentially changed the name of the game and things like that. So, 2 years ago, what looked different about the threat landscape compared to today?
yeah. So I think if I take it back slightly further than that, the old world was very much around securing your network. So you had an office or a location, and you had your data and your systems, and everyone was inside that umbrella. And so you'd think about perimeter only, and you say, well, if I stop people getting into the perimeter, then my data is safe. So you think a lot about the perimeter and not a lot about that. As the world has changed in terms of our working practices, people are working everywhere. They're working worldwide. We talk about our own business here. We've got people worldwide running different services, and therefore we don't have a perimeter. We have lots of different places. So the endpoint then becomes really important because protecting the endpoint, regardless of where that is, and by endpoint we mean whether that's a mobile phone, whether that is a laptop, a tablet, whether that's a traditional phone as well. They're all potential route into your data. So protecting that endpoint becomes important, and protecting the connectivity that's there. The second bit that really brings into it is identity, and identity protection in a way that was far less important in a world where you were inside a perimeter. If you think about, um, in a building sense, you had an ID card that got you in the building, and then you were kind of considered safe. Well, I'm in the building now, so it's fine. Yeah, identity in an IT sense is not that dissimilar. You have your Microsoft login, for example, and it gets you access to things. And the way we set up access these days is with SSO, which is single sign on. So most applications, and you will have seen this as an individual and as a company, most applications will use your one account, and you'll go, well, I'll use that account for my Salesforce app and for my Microsoft 365 app, and so on and so on and so on. The problem is that's in theory secure, but if that account gets compromised, you've suddenly got access to all of these SaaS providers, wherever they may be. And identity becomes critical then. And the way
Mhm.
we're looking at protecting that, and the way the industry looks at protecting that, is thinking about the obvious examples of things like impossible travel. It's fairly easily dealt with. But if Mark O'Dell logs in from Northern Ireland at 10
Yeah,
o'clock in the morning, and then suddenly is logging in from South Africa at 10:15 in the morning, well, that's not possible, is it? So
definitely
you need
not.
to think about that. Should I even be allowed to log in from South Africa? If I'm a UK-based employee and I'm not traveling for work, do we
Yeah,
want Mark to be able to log into that? Isn't that just a
there's no
risk?
need. Yeah,
There's no need. So we start to think about things like that. How do you secure the identity of that person and
yeah.
identify things and make sure that they're safe?
Yeah. Oh, a lot to unpack, which is why, we've dedicated an entire podcast about this because there are a lot of things to consider, right? And something that you've mentioned in the past is this dichotomy between the physical world and the virtual world, right? And I'm glad that you went back further than 2 years because I think maybe a lot of listeners or viewers out there might be solely thinking about the physical protection of it all, protecting your physical assets. And that's why I also really appreciate the emphasis that you placed on data, which obviously leans now into the virtual side of things and how that needs more protection than the physical, arguably. So, would you say that identity based attacks are now the dominant threat? You had mentioned, how human risk is basically at the top of the charts in terms of the kinds of threats coming out.
Yeah, I think that's right, because if you think about your typical phishing attack, what that's really doing is trying to steal identity. And by identity, we mean the account access.
Right. So,
It's
not my
trying
physical
to,
ID.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So it is trying to encourage you to share that identity, that credential. Oh, okay. So this is Mark's Office 365 account. Okay, we know what that is. And hopefully we've got his password, because he's now gone and filled in a form. And now we can see where we can get to with that. And there's a sort of there's an offshoot of this, which often I think affects individuals than it does companies, but it's the reuse of usernames and passwords. So if I habitually use my email address and a password, and I use it for uh, a birthday card website that I've created some nice pictures on, and my corporate email account, which one of those is more likely to get hacked is the birthday card website. And you might think, well, I don't care because what are they going to
Yeah.
do? Send me a birthday card with a picture of my face on it? Who cares? But the answer is, but they now know that corporate email address and the password that you used for that. And if you are
Right.
a person that reuses it, well, what are
Yeah.
they going to do? You're going to go and try it on your corporate email. So
Mm,
that's why password reuse is really dangerous, because you might get it stolen from um, a low quality security place and get it reused on a high quality security place.
goodness. I don't know about you guys listening at home or watching at home, but that in and of itself just made me rethink my passwords, and how I'm using them. So, yeah, thank you for that top tip there, Mark. So, switching gears a little bit to now the business impact of getting hit by a cybersecurity attack. So, when an SMB is hit by a serious incident, what's usually the first real consequence that they feel?
So the biggest consequence, and we'll go that way round, is often reputational. This is a lot of the stuff they lose or can be replaced or recreated. So the data, quite often they can restore it from a backup. But as we talked about earlier, well, if they've also stolen all of that data, and they've had to essentially selling that data, they're potentially doing bad things to your customers, and your customers are then in a much worse position. And you also, because of the law, which quite rightly, you have to go and tell those customers, oh,
Yes.
by the
Oh,
way,
yeah.
we just lost all of your data. So even if the business impact directly is containable, because you're like, well, it's okay, I've got a
Right.
backup, I can back out of this, we're good, we're good.
Sure.
You've got to go to your customers. All that credit
Mm.
card information about you, we've just lost it. All of the orders that you've placed with us over the last 6 months, yeah, that got stolen, and now
Oh
that's out in the
my
wide world.
gosh.
I can't put that back in the box. I can't put the
Right.
lid
Yeah,
on.
you can't.
Yeah. So you don't want that to happen in the first place.
Mhm. And you also don't want to lose the trust of your employees as well. Obviously,
Of
depending on
course.
what sector you're in and the nature of your business, they would also feel vulnerable on a personal note, in terms of their, employee data, if you will, being compromised, because HR has a lot of personal data on their employees as well. And we don't want that getting out either. So, yeah, I definitely like that emphasis on that misplaced trust, or that loss of trust rather, because that is something that you can't really throw money at to solve, essentially, or to
Yes.
get back rather. All right. So, in your experience, Mark, could most of the SMB leaders you've spoken to directly confidently answer the question, "Are we covered?"
I mean, they
Bit
can
of a loaded
confidently
question.
answer it. Are they right is another matter. So and I think this is the thing. I think a lot of people will confidently answer yes, yes, we're covered, and they will genuinely think that they're covered. And to be fair, they will have gone through some process and thought about it, and they're not idiots. These people are not running businesses are foolish. But what they don't know what they don't know. I think that is the thing, I think. And without some sort of framework and some sort of process, it's really easy to miss things. And internal IT, and even to some extent an outsourced service provider, they are not specialists in thinking about some of these things. So again, they will tick the boxes. The world evolves so quickly, and the changes are so significant at times that if you're not keeping ahead of it, you are going to fall behind, and you are going to potentially fall victim to the latest iterations of scams and attacks.
A little doom and gloom, but I mean, that's the name of the game when you talk about cybersecurity. It's difficult to balance between, being informative and realistic about the situation, but also not leaning into fear mongering. So while we are giving a realistic depiction of cybersecurity in the UK today, that doesn't mean that there aren't solutions to all of these. We're just bringing these issues to your attention because, as you had mentioned, Mark, a lot of these vulnerabilities are hidden, pun intended. And it's also about just uncovering what you don't know as well, so that you can actually do something about it and protect the business.
Yeah, look, just to jump on that, I would say you are unlikely to set up a business and think about how to set up your tax affairs and how to
Mm,
produce paperwork without consulting a lawyer, or
yeah,
someone legal, and without consulting someone on the accountancy on the tax side. Now they might be your
right.
staff, they might not be, but you're
Yeah.
you're unlikely to just go, oh well, I'm probably just going to guess it'll be all right.
No.
I've read a couple of things online. I've read a couple of things online about what the tax regime is, or how you do PAYE for start, or what your HR laws are. So it'll be
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah.
So why would you do that? Why would you do that with your IT security? And so that's all we're
Yeah.
saying is that all these things are,
Yeah.
for the most part, solvable. Um, you just need to go, well, let's go and talk about it with an expert. Let's find out where the gaps are, and let's decide as a business what is our risk appetite. And some businesses may have a huge risk appetite because their the downside of anything happening is really low
Yeah.
for them because their estate is not really complicated or whatever. Whereas others think about, we have clients that are um, in the medical profession.
Mm,
Clearly their data is very sensitive, and they have to take
very.
a much higher level of care, and they
Right.
take this much more seriously than
Yeah.
others.
Yeah. Excellent points, well made as usual. So, in wrapping this up, the last question that I have for you is, if you were advising a 50-person business owner listening or watching today, what's the first practical step that they should take to feel like they can start getting a hold over this big looming cybersecurity issue?
Yeah. As has been my habit so far in this, I'm going to answer a different question. No,
Okay.
so I'm going to say, what would I get them to not do first, actually, is what I'm going to say. So
Okay.
what I would say is just don't go out and buy something, because I think that is the trap that we can easily fall into, is saying, well, I need a tool to solve this problem. So I'm just going to go out and I've heard that ABC protection product is great. everyone tells me it's great, so I'm going to buy that. And it might be the right answer, but you don't know because you've not gone through the process of understanding what your risks are, where those gaps are, and the things that you need to plug. You may already have a perfectly good solution. Microsoft comes with a load of bits and pieces if you've got 365 that covers a lot of this. You might not need a third-party solution. You might need to buy anything. You might just need to train your staff to make sure that they are behaving in a sensible way. So to me, that first step is to speak to someone who is a professional in it and to run through that process of going, let's look at what we've got, let's look at what we do, and let's look at the gaps and decide then how we fill those gaps. You might not need to fill any, so don't rush out and buy something.
I love that. That is definitely not the answer I would expect from a product director, because usually it's all about buy this, buy that. This is basically that magic silver bullet, but I'm glad that you went the opposite way. All right. So, Mark, that brings us to the end of your episode. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Lynn. It was great. Cheers.
Thank you. That's a wrap on today's episode of The Hidden Podcast. If this episode gave you an aha moment that helped you untangle something that's been bugging you, subscribe and share it with a friend who's in the same boat. And if you're wondering where you stand across the 6 hidden layers, try our cybersecurity snapshot in the description below. It's a lot less painful than a breach. Until next time, don't let your risks stay hidden.